Welcome and thank you for joining me for this quiet journey into the past. In this story, we will take a long, gentle walk through medieval Europe. There will be no rush. We will move slowly, pausing often, noticing details, and lingering on the small things that made up ordinary life. Perhaps as you listen, you will feel your eyes grow heavy. Perhaps the slow rhythm of the words will carry you into sleep. That is perfectly fine. The past will still be here when you wake. In the heart of many medieval villages, there is a house unlike the others. Its yard is stacked with barrels and buckets. Its door stands half open to let out sweet, warm steam. The smell that drifts across the lane is unmistakable. Grain toasting, herbs steeping, something rich and alive. This is the brew house, and the person who keeps its fire is the village brewer. Ale is more than a pleasant drink. It is safer than much of the water, a daily nourishment, a quiet medicine, and a comfort at day's end. Children sip weak ale, laborers quench thirst after harvest, travelers find cheer in a mug, priests bless feasts with stronger brew. Behind this simple drink lies steady work and quiet knowledge, most often kept by women, though in towns men and guilds grow powerful in the trade. The brewer's day begins early, often before the sun crests the fields. She moves through the cool dawn to her hearth, where last night's embers may still glow. She stirs them to life or builds a fresh fire, feeding it with dry faggots and oak logs until the big copper kettle can be set to warm. Beside the fire stand sacks of malted barley, sweet with a scent like toasted bread. Malting itself is a small craft, barley soaked, spread to sprout just enough to unlock sweetness, then dried on heated floor until golden. Some brewers malt their own grain, raking and turning it for days. Others buy from maltsters who specialize in the work. Water is fetched while the fire roars. In villages blessed with clear spring, the brewer may simply draw from well. In others she hauls buckets from stream or mill race, careful to choose the cleanest source. Water shapes ale's taste. A wise brewer knows which nearby spring gives soft sweetness and which can turn bitter. The first great task is mashing. She fills a large wooden mash tun with malt and hot water, stirring slowly with a long paddle. Steam rises, the smell of sweet grain fills the room, heavy and comforting. Temperature matters. Too cool and starch stays locked. Too hot and the grain scalds. There is no thermometer here, only years of practice, the feel of warm liquid on wrist, the sound of grain thickening just so. She stirs until every kernel is bathed, then covers the tun to rest. During this hour or more, enzymes quietly turn starch to sugar. While mash sweetens, the brewer tends to other chores. Buckets are scrubbed clean, jugs are checked for cracks, barrels are swelled with water so their staves hold tight. Cats prowl to keep mice from grain, dogs stretch near the hearth. Children, if she has them, run errands, splitting wood, gathering herbs, fetching more water. In some homes, the whole household joins the brewing. In others, hired helpers lend strong arms for lifting and hauling. When the mash has rested enough, the brewer draws off wort, the sweet liquid now hidden in grain. She lifts a plug at the tun's base, catching the first runnings in pails. More hot water is gently poured over grain to wash out remaining sugar, a careful act known to every experienced hand. The combined wort flows into the great copper kettle. Its color glows golden brown in firelight. Its smell is rich and inviting. Now comes the boil, the roaring heart of brewing. As the wort rolls and steams, foam rises. The brewer skims with quick strokes, then adds flavorings. In much of early medieval Europe, this means a mix called gruit, an herbal blend that might include bog myrtle, yarrow, rosemary, sweet gale, or mugwort. Each brewer has her own recipe, often secret and fiercely guarded. Herbs bring bitterness, preserve ale from souring, and sometimes lend gentle medicine. In later centuries, hops begin to appear, little green cones from vines, resinous and pleasantly bitter. They keep ale fresh longer, perfect for trade. A forward-thinking brewer might pay dearly for a small bag to experiment, knowing hopped ale could last weeks instead of days. The kettle boils for an hour or more. The smell escapes into the lane, sweet, bready, laced with herbs or hops. Neighbors passing by know at once what day it is. Some pause to chat, leaning in doorway. Children beg for a sip of the warm, sweet liquid. The brewer may offer a taste from ladle, laughing at sticky faces. Once boiling is done, the wort must cool. In winter, this is easy. Tubs set outside under clean cloth, chill in crisp air. In summer, cooling is trickier. Some brewers sink tubs in shaded stream or pack wet cloth around them. A patient eye is needed. Pitching yeast into wort too hot will kill it. Too cold, and it sleeps. Fermentation begins when yeast is added. Medieval brewers often rely on wild yeasts lingering in casks or caught from air. Some keep special starter, a lump of yeast-rich dough or a scoop of frothy ale saved from last brew. As soon as yeast meets sweet wort, bubbles rise and foam blooms. The room fills with faint hiss and smell of baking bread. The brewer watches closely. Temperature, cleanliness, and timing all shape flavor and strength. Days pass with gentle tending. Each morning she checks the frothing surface, skimming scum, whispering a quick prayer perhaps. Many believe charms help, a sprig of blessed herbs above cask, a whispered saint's name. A sudden change, silence when there should be foam, sour tang in place of sweetness can mean disaster. Grain is dear, a spoiled batch is heavy loss. Every brewer knows the dread of lifting lid and finding her work turned to vinegar. While Ale ferments, the brewhouse becomes a small social hub. Neighbors stop by to ask when the next batch will be ready. A tavern keeper might strike a bargain for 2 fresh barrels. farmers linger to sip older brew and share gossip. Who married, whose cow calved, whether the Lord plans new taxes. Children fetch warm mugs of thin ale for thirsty parents working fields. For some, the brewhouse feels like hearth and inn combined. When fermentation slows and bubbles fade, the brewer transfers ale to clean casks. Barrels are heavy. Helpers roll and tilt them with care. Bungholes are stopped with wooden plugs. Each cask may be marked with chalk or simple symbols to show strength and age. Some ale will be drunk, mild and young, still slightly sweet. Stronger brews for feast or sale may be left to settle longer in cool cellars or shaded rooms. The economy of ale is complex. Many brewers sell by jug directly from door, others supply taverns. Payment may be coin, but often is barter. Flour, eggs, meat, or labor. In some places, the lord or monastery claims a right to brew or tax. In towns, brewing guilds enforce quality and protect members. They may appoint ale tasters, officials who visit to judge taste, strength, and honesty of measure. A failed test to bring fines or ruin reputation, so care and cleanliness matter deeply. Work is constant and physical. Stirring mash is heavy, lifting, scalding kettles, risks, burns, hauling casks, strains back and shoulders. Yet many brewers manage while tending children and house. Brewing fits into the rhythm of domestic life. A fire kept hot while meals cook, a batch fermenting as laundry dries, barrels tapped while guests arrive. There is also seasonal rhythm. Winter favors strong, dark ales that keep well and warm bellies. Spring may bring lighter brews with fresh herbs. In summer heat, brewing is harder. Cooling is tricky. Spoilage more common. Autumn after harvest is busy, when grain is plentiful and families brew to last through cold months. Festivals and saints' days dot the year, each calling for special batches. Spiced ale for Christmas, honeyed brew for weddings, strong drink for harvest home. Faith mingles with the craft. Some brewers dedicate first pour to saints, often St. Arnold, St. Bridget, or St. Nicholas. Charms and prayers are common, a cross scratched on mash tun, holy water sprinkled on first cask. Brewing feels like alchemy, invisible forces turning sweet grain to living drink. In a world of mysteries, a bubbling vat seems proof that unseen life thrives and blesses. Stories gather here too. A traveler once arrived near dusk, weary and cold. The brewer gave him warm mug and bed by hearth, and later learned he was a wandering minstrel who repaid her with songs. Another time, a whole batch soured after a thunderstorm. Folk said lightning angered the spirits. The brewer rebuilt hearth and started anew. Once a feast nearly failed when a noble wedding drained every cask. Neighbors rallied, sharing ale so no guest went dry. These small tales echo long after, retold whenever mugs are raised. Evenings in the brewhouse are warm and fragrant. The brewer sits weary but content. hands smelling of malt and herbs, hair damp from steam. Children sleep nearby, cats curl by fire. Outside, night sounds rise, frogs, distant dogs, perhaps the creak of the mill wheel. From tavern or cottage comes laughter, where her ale is already poured. Her day's work nourishes joy as much as thirst. Though chronicles praise kings with wine cups, it is ale that sustains the common world. It feeds harvesters, travelers, craftsmen. It comforts sickness and celebrates love. Behind it is quiet labor, a woman stirring mash before dawn, guarding fermentation through nights of prayer and watchfulness. Her brew keeps the village alive. So when you think of the Middle Ages, picture this humble place, a timbered house with smoke and steam, barrels lined like silent sentinels, and within it a brewer tending the mysterious work of grain, water, and tarn. Each mug poured carries warmth of hearth and steady care, a daily miracle made simple. The narrow lane smells of leather and damp earth, shaded by crooked eaves that lean toward one another like gossiping neighbors. A lantern hangs above a low door marked with a wooden boot, its paint faded but still clear enough to guide anyone seeking new soles or sturdy shoes. Inside, the cobbler's shop is a quiet refuge from the busy street. The air is warm with the scent of tanned hide, beeswax, and the faint smoke of a small brazier kept glowing for softening glue. Benches line the walls, each scarred by years of careful work. Awls and knives, hammers and tiny nails lie neatly in their places, though the tools are worn smooth by long hands. Strips of leather hang from pegs, some dyed black or brown, others left pale and waiting for the craftsman's hand. Boots in various states of repair stand ready on shelves, some with split soles, others needing only a fresh polish before they return to their masters. The cobbler himself, a man with a graying beard and patient eyes, sits bent over a last, a wooden form shaped like a foot. He threads a needle with waxed linen, pulling it through a supple upper that he is stitching to a sturdy sole. His fingers are scarred but nimble. Each pull is firm, sure, and rhythmic, like the quiet ticking of a clock. Now and then he hums under his breath, a tune so low it's nearly lost under the scrape of leather and the sigh of the fire. Beside him, an apprentice sorts tacks into small bowls. The boy's hands are not yet sure, and sometimes a tack spills and rolls across the floor, but he is quick to retrieve it before the master notices. He wears an apron too big for him, its hem nearly touching the ground. When the cobbler calls for thread or glue, the boy hurries to fetch it, eager to please, but still learning the calm pace of the trade. Outside, the lane echoes with distant market cries and the clatter of carts over cobbles, but here time seems slower. The cobbler's craft does not rush. It requires patience. Each shoe must be measured, cut, soaked, shaped, and sewn with care. A hurried stitch might loosen in the first rain, and a careless cut could waste dear leather. The master knows this and passes it on to his apprentice with each task. On a shelf near the window sits a row of lasts of many sizes, narrow ones for ladies' slippers, wide ones for farmers' boots, even a tiny one for a baby's first shoes. Each bears marks of use, scratches, stains, initials carved into the wood long ago. Some belong to customers who have long since passed, yet the cobbler keeps them out of respect, and because one never knows when a grandchild may come seeking the same fit as a grandfather. The day's first customer arrives, a miller, his hands dusted with flour, carrying a pair of boots so caked with mud they seem more earth than leather. He sets them down with a sigh and asks for new soles, for the roads to the mill have worn the old ones thin. The cobbler nods, turning each boot over to inspect the damage. He does not hurry his verdict. He traces the seams, presses the heel, and finally names his price with gentle certainty. The miller nods and leaves the boots behind, his step lighter as he goes. Next comes a merchant's wife with a small bundle wrapped in linen. She unwraps a pair of delicate shoes, their ribbons frayed and their toes scuffed from many dances. She asks if they can be made fine again, for a feast approaches, and she has no wish to appear shabby. The cobbler smiles and says he can mend them well enough to make them shine like new. She seems relieved and lingers a moment to admire the workshop's calm before stepping back into the busy street. The apprentice eyes the merchant's shoes with interest. They are lighter than the heavy boots he usually sees, their soles thin and supple. The master uses this chance to teach how to work with delicate hides, how to stitch without puckering the leather, how to choose the right wax for polish. The boy listens, nodding, though his fingers still fumble when he tries to copy the master's precise motions. Midday brings a brief pause. The cobbler eats a simple meal of bread and cheese, washing it down with a cup of watered ale. The apprentice sits nearby, swinging his legs as he chews, his face smudged with glue. They speak little, but share a quiet contentment, the sound of the town drifting in through the window, bells, laughter, a hawker's call. Work resumes when the meal is done, unhurried but steady. In the afternoon, the door creaks open to admit a young knight squire, bearing his master's riding boots. They are elegant, but worn at the stirrup and spattered with mud from the road. The squire bows awkwardly and explains that his lord expects to ride again soon. The cobbler studies the boots and assures the boy they can be ready by dawn. The squire thanks him profusely, relief softening his nervous posture. The master chooses a supple but strong leather for the knight's boots. He cuts with long, sure strokes, the blade whispering through the hide. The apprentice watches closely, seeing how each cut wastes nothing. Scraps are saved for patches and straps. Be the smallest pieces have use. The smell of fresh cut leather fills the room rich and warm, mingling with the faint smoke of the brazier. Outside, rain begins to patter on the street. The workshop grows cozier, its single lantern throwing a golden light over the benches. The cobbler does not pause, though he glances once toward the window to watch drops chase each other down the glass. Rain is good for business, he thinks. Wet roads wear boots thin and send more folk his way. He smiles faintly and keeps stitching. An older man arrives, leaning on a stick and carrying a pair of shoes that have seen better days. He greets the cobbler like an old friend, for they have known each other many years. The shoes, though cracked and faded, fit the man's feet like no other, and he begs that they mended one more tie. The cobbler agrees, his voice gentle. He knows some shoes carry more than feet. They carry memory. The apprentice helps by cutting new insoles guided by the master's steady words. It is delicate work, for the old shoes are fragile, and the boy's hands tremble slightly. The cobbler places a reassuring hand on his shoulder, reminding him that care matters more than speed. Together they bring the shoes back to quiet dignity, their cracks eased, their souls strong again. The old man leaves smiling, his step more certain than when he arrived. Later, as dusk nears, the cobbler polishes a finished pair of boots until they gleam softly in the fading light. He rubs wax in small circles, his eyes half closed, his thoughts perhaps on the many roads these boots will tread. The apprentice sweeps the floor, gathering curls of leather and stray tacks. The sound of the broom is soft and steady, mingling with the distant toll of evening bells. When work is done, the master sets aside his tools with quiet reverence. He wipes each blade and awl before returning it to its place. The brazier is banked, its coals glowing faintly. A last look around the shop shows order restored, though the scent of leather lingers like a promise of tomorrow's craft. Outside, the lane is darkening, lanterns flickering to life along its length. The cobbler locks the door and places the day's coins into a small chest. The apprentice follows, yawning but proud of the work they've done. Together they step into the cool evening air, their shoulders easy, their pace unhurried. The shop will sleep now, quiet under its painted sign. Tomorrow it will wake again to the sound of awls and hammers, the soft rasp of leather on wood, the murmured lessons between master and boy. For in this place, patience and skill are treasures more lasting than gold, and every pair of shoes carries the steady heartbeat of a craft well loved. Far from the castle and its laws, deep within the green hush of the forest, a small fire smoldered beneath a roof of leaves. Smoke curled thin and grey among the oaks, rising no higher than the first branches before it vanished in the mist. Here, where the paths grew faint and the moss-covered logs muffled footsteps, the outlaws kept their camp, a place of secrecy and wary freedom. The hideout could not be found by chance. A narrow deer track wound toward it, then vanished into thicket. Only those who knew the forest well could follow the signs. A bent branch, a stone stacked on another, a faint notch carved into bark. The Outlaws kept scouts along these paths, silent watchers who blended with the trees. If strangers wandered close, they were turned aside with warning, or sometimes with an arrow loosed to start but not strike. At dawn the camp woke quietly. There were no bells or horns, only the rustle of leaves and the muted cough of a fire coaxed to life. Men and women stirred from their shelters, rough lean-to built of branches and hides, or shallow pits roofed with sod. They were dressed in patched wool and leather, practical and weather-stained. Some were young, runaways from towns, others older, faces lined with hard years and harder choices. Breakfast was simple: coarse bread, nuts, dried meat from the last hunt. A pot of thin broth hung over the fire, scenting the cool air with herbs gathered nearby. Conversation was low and wary, voices carried easily in the woods. Children, yes, there were a few, ate silently, wide-eyed, but already learning the quiet ways of the outlaw life. Dogs dozed near the fire, their ears flicking at every distant sound. After eating, the camp broke into tasks. Some went to check the traps set along the forest edges, snares for rabbits, pits for boar, and clever nets for birds. Others slipped away toward the road to watch for travelers or patrols. A few stayed to tend the camp itself, mending boots, sharpening knives, or weaving baskets and ropes from gathered reeds. Every hand had work, for survival here was never certain, and winter always waited. Weapons were modest but well cared for. Bows of yew, short swords and knives, cudgels fashioned from oak. A single crossbow, treasured and carefully oiled, was kept for serious danger. Armor was scarce. Most wore only leather jerkins or thick cloaks that could turn aside a glancing blow. Yet skill and cunning made up for what they lacked. The outlaws knew every hidden path, every hollow tree, every stream that could hide their trail. Their leader was not called Lord, but all looked to him, a man of quiet strength, once perhaps a soldier or forester. He moved with calm certainty. He listened more than he spoke, weighed each risk before taking it. Some said he had been wronged by a cruel bailiff. Others whispered of outlawry forced by hunger. Whatever his past, he held his band together with fairness and a steady hand. The forest gave some safety, but danger was never far. Patrols from the castle sometimes ventured near, and the sound of hounds could send the camp scattering. The outlaws practiced this often. At the first signal, fires doused, shelters abandoned, and the band melting into the green like deer. Each carried only what could be borne at a run: bow, knife, and a bundle of food. More than once such drills had saved their lives. By midday, scouts returned with news of the world beyond. One might report a merchant's cart heavy with goods and lightly guarded. Another brought word of a tax collector riding with coin. These tidings were discussed around the fire, plans made in murmurs. The leader chose carefully. They struck only when need was sharp and the risk small. A foolish raid could bring the Lord's wrath and end the fragile safety they clung to. Yet life here was not only fear. In the still afternoons, when danger seemed far, the camp could grow almost peaceful. Someone might whittle a wooden toy for a child. Another strung a new bowstring and hummed softly under breath. Women repaired cloaks and boots with careful stitches. Once in a while, laughter came, a quick, warm burst before fading back to cautious quiet. Even outlaw hearts needed moments of human warmth. The children played as they could, small games of hide and seek among the trees, tossing pine cones as if they were spears, learning to walk without sound. The older ones watched and learned the forest secrets, how to tell north by moss, how to read the flight of birds, how to find safe water. Someday they might take up bow and knife, though all hoped for another fate. When the day cooled toward evening, hunters returned with game, a rabbit, sometimes a deer, if fortune smiled. Fires were lit low and shielded by rocks to keep the smoke thin. Supper was simple but welcome, meat roasted on spits, nuts and berries, a little bread saved from some past raid. If a raid had gone well and safely, there might be wine or cheese taken from some careless merchant, shared in quiet celebration. Stories were told then, soft and cautious in the dark, tales of brave escapes, clever tricks played on greedy sheriffs, or the memory of better days before outlawry. Sometimes a wandering minstrel or friar would find the camp and bring news of the wider world, songs of kings and saints, rumors of wars, or the price now placed on certain heads. The children listened wide-eyed. The adults smiled, wary but grateful for the thread of connection. Yet even in these gentler hours, watch was kept. Scouts perched in trees or crouched in thickets, ears keen for hoofbeats or the bay of hounds. The leader himself often made a final round, moving silently from shadow to check the sentries. Safety was fragile here, and every night might bring flight. When darkness deepened, the camp grew hushed. Fires burned low to embers, hoods and cloaks wrapped close against chill. Some slept in pairs beneath rough blankets, others alone with knife at hand. The forest whispered and creaked around them, alive with night creatures but safe for those who knew its ways. Above, the stars gleamed cold and far, uncaring of the lives hidden below. Though hunted and outcast, the outlaws endured. In this hidden hollow they found a hard kind of freedom, no taxes, no lords, no masters, but their own survival. It was a life of risk and shadow, yet also of courage and quiet skill. When dawn came, pale and misty, the camp would stir again to its careful rhythm, unseen and unbroken beneath the ancient trees. When the campaigning season ended and the roads turned to mud, Armies melted away like mist in autumn sun. Knights rode home to their halls, peasants returned to ploughs, and kings retreated behind stone walls to count coin and plan the next year's quarrels. But mercenaries, great roving bands of hired swords, needed winter shelter. Some drifted to cities that could afford their keep, others broke apart into smaller companies, and sometimes, when a lord was wise or merely practical, he offered them quarters in his land for the cold months, trading food and roofs for peace and steel at hand. This winter, the old abbey barns outside the castle town had been given to such a company. Their captain, a scarred man known as Allard of Flanders, had fought in half the wars of a generation and wore his grey beard like a banner. His men, 100 strong, marched in late October with tattered banners and muddy boots, arriving just before the first true frost. The townsfolk lined the lanes to watch them pass, long pikes shouldered, swords clattering, helms dented and patched. They were no parade ground knights, but hard, weather-worn fighters. The barns and outer cloisters made a serviceable camp. Straw was strewn deep. Braziers and small hearths soon glowed where monks once stored grain. Wagons unloaded barrels of dried peas, salted pork, coarse bread and ale paid for by the Lord to keep the company fed and out of mischief. Stables filled with their tough little horses, smithies rang as the men repaired bent mail and broken spearheads. For the first few days there was unease. Townsfolk kept doors bolted, and mothers warned children not to wander near the abbey. Mercenaries had a reputation, wild in drink, quick with a blade, loyal only to coin. Yet Allard kept strict order. He set watches, forbade looting or drunken brawling, and punished theft swiftly. Slowly, suspicion softened. By the time Advent neared, the mercenaries were a known, if not entirely trusted, part of winter life. The men themselves were a strange fellowship. They came from many lands, Gascon and Breton, Lombard and Saxon, even a Moorish archer with silent step and dark, thoughtful eyes. Around their fires, languages mixed, hands gesturing when words failed. Some were young and reckless, chasing pay and adventure. Others were old soldiers with scars and quiet habits, mending boots by firelight. Their banners hung limp but clean, patched with bits of cloth that told stories no minstrel ever sang. Life in winter quarters was slower but never idle. Each morning horns called the camp to drill, pikes formed in ordered squares, archers practiced at straw butts, horsemen trotted the frozen fields, learning to wheel and strike as one. Veterans taught the young the craft of war, how to set a pike wall, mend armor, bind wounds, and keep weapons sharp. By mid-morning the camp was alive with clatter and shouts, echoing off stone and bare trees. Afternoons turned to quieter tasks. Armor was polished and patched, leather oiled against damp, broken bowstrings twisted anew. Tailors among the men stitched worn surcoats, Fletchers shaved arrow shafts and bound goose feathers. The smithy glowed with red light as hammers rang on dented helms, and sword edges were drawn keen again. Outside, horses were groomed until their coats shone in the pale sun. Paydays came once a month. The Lord's steward arrived with guarded chests of coin, and men queued before Lard's table to take their wages, silver pennies and groats, sometimes foreign gold still sticky with wax seals. Some spent freely in town on drink, dice, or women. Others hoarded, dreaming of a farm or smithy someday. The taverns closest to the abbey grew noisy on those nights, though patrols kept the peace, and Alad's punishments reminded all to respect local law. The town, once wary, found small ways to profit. Baiters sold coarse bread and sweet cakes alike. Alewives brewed extra barrels. Merchants hawked boots, cloaks, and spare gear. Children lingered near the abbey gate, hoping for foreign coins or trinkets. A few brave souls brought fiddles and pipes to play for tips by the campfires, learning songs in languages they didn't know. Yet winter was long, snow drifted deep, roads vanished under ice, and boredom pressed hard. Cards and dice clattered on overturned barrels. Tales of old battles grew wilder by the telling. Some men carved chess pieces or mended nets for fishing once thaw came. The Moorish archer taught boys from the town to fletch arrows. An old Lombard showed local smiths a new way to temper sword blades. Sometimes the company's doctor, half soldier, half barber surgeon, treated townsfolk when fevers ran, earning cautious thanks. Not all was peaceful. Quarrels flared after drink, blades flashed once or twice before captains waded in to break fights. A theft of winter apples from a farmer's store nearly turned to riot until Allard himself marched the culprit back with the stolen sack and paid double in silver. Slowly the town learned these mercenaries were rough, but not lawless, under firm command. The men kept their own rituals. Before the year turned, they held a night of remembrance. Fires ringed the abbey yard, and each soldier threw into the flames a token of comrades lost, a strip of cloth, a bent arrow, a name whispered softly. No songs, only silence and the hiss of snow falling into the blaze. Townsfolk who watched from a distance felt a strange shiver of respect for men who bore grief so plainly. At Christmas, the abbey bells rang again, though monks had long since gone to safer cloisters. The company stood quietly as the town's priest blessed them and sprinkled holy water. A feast followed in the barns, bread and broth thickened with meat, a few casks of ale, even pies from grateful townsfolk. Soldiers laughed and sang ballads, some rough, some tender. Children were lifted to shoulders to see sword tricks and hear tales of far-off lands. For a night, suspicion softened into shared cheer. January brought harder cold. Frost rhymed the camp, and men wrapped cloaks tight, faces red and raw. Training grew brief, fires burned low to save fuel. Some fell ill with fever or lung rot. The doctor and town healer worked side by side. Yet there was a kind of patience in the camp. Soldiers know how to wait when roads are snowbound and war sleeps. As days lengthened and ice cracked on the river, signs of departure stirred. Banners were mended, wagons readied. The smithy roared with last work. Horses were shod and fed richly for the march. Allard met with the Lord in the keep to renew contracts or seek new coin elsewhere. Some men planned to ride on to new wars. A few, tired of wandering, struck deals with local farmers or artisans to stay. When the first dry road showed through thawing mud, the company formed ranks in the abbey yard. Townsfolk gathered again to watch, some relieved, some strangely wistful. The soldiers looked leaner, cleaner, their gear well kept, banners brightened. Allard rode before them, saluted the Lord upon the wall, and gave the order to march. Drums beat slowly. Pikes glinted as they filed out through the gate, bound for some distant border. When the last echo of boots faded, the abbey barn stood empty but for straw and a lingering scent of smoke. Children crept in to play at war among the forgotten hearths. Farmers returned to fields, merchants to roads, and the town exhaled, safe, richer in coin, and marked forever by the winter when hard men became part of its life. Around hearths for years after, old folk would tell of that winter, how the mercenaries came rough and strange, how the captain kept stern peace, how songs in many tongues echoed under snowy eaves. It was not a tale of battle, but of waiting, mending, and uneasy trust. Quiet side of war that lives between campaigns, when swords rest but never quite sleep. Beneath the castle, far below the echo of the great hall and the warmth of hearths, lay the dungeon. Few went there willingly. Its stair began behind a thick oaken door, banded with iron, a door most passed without thought, though all knew what lay beyond. Down the winding steps the air cooled and grew damp, carrying a scent of stone, moss, and rusted metal. A single lantern, swinging from an iron hook, lit the descent with wavering yellow. The keeper of the dungeon lived above its door in a narrow chamber, simple and spare. He was an older man with quiet eyes, neither cruel nor kind, simply patient in the work that had been his for decades. At dawn he woke, lit his lantern, and went below to check his charges. He moved with slow, measured steps, his keys clinking softly at his belt. The dungeon was not a place for haste. At the foot of the stair stretched a passage of rough stone, arched and low. The walls sweated moisture. The floor was cold underfoot. Doors of heavy oak lined the corridor, each bound with iron and pierced with a tiny grating through which air and light could enter. Beyond them lay small cells, straw on the floor, a jug of water, a low wooden stool, or none at all. The dungeon was meant to hold, not to comfort. The keeper's first task each morning was to check every door. He pressed his weight against the great bolts, tested the locks with his ring of keys, and spoke a low word to any prisoner within. Some answered politely, some cursed or begged. He met each with the same Sivan voice. Then he made his round with a bucket of water and a basket of coarse bread. Each prisoner received his ration through the narrow hatch, enough to live, never more. By mid-morning the place had warmed slightly from the world above, though no true light reached here. The only glow came from the keeper's lantern and a few small oil lamps set in iron brackets along the wall. Shadows clung to the corners. The air smelled of damp straw, stone, and tallow smoke. Rats sometimes skittered, but even they moved quietly, aware of the hush. The dungeon held many kinds of souls. There were petty thieves awaiting judgment, poachers caught in the Lord's forest, drunken brawlers cooling their tempers. Sometimes a captured spy or a rebel noble would be lodged in the deeper cells, chained and guarded day and night. Each had his story, whispered or shouted through the grating. The keeper listened rarely. It was not his place to weigh truth. He was there to keep, not to judge. From time to time the steward descended, brisk and efficient, to speak with a prisoner or deliver orders from the Lord. Guards might come too, clanking and laughing uneasily, to fetch a man for questioning or release. The chaplain sometimes visited, bringing quiet words and prayer to those who would hear him. His lantern light and murmured Latin made the dark seem briefly less heavy. The cells nearest the stair were for short stays. Farther down the passage, past a second door thick with iron, lay the long-term keeps, colder, narrower, with chains fixed into the stone. Here the air was bitter with damp, and silence deeper. The keeper disliked this part, but tended it dutifully, checking each chain and lock. If a fire burned in the great hall above, no warmth touched these walls. In the middle of the day the keeper paused to eat a small meal by the stair. Bread, cheese, perhaps a bit of broth brought by a boy from the kitchens. He sat with his lantern beside him, listening to the muffled sounds of the castle far above, faint echoes of hammers, bells, and sometimes laughter drifting down the spiral. Here, life moved at another pace, slow and watchful. Sometimes a new prisoner arrived. Then the dungeon stirred with sudden noise. Boots on stone, orders shouted, a man protesting or weeping. The keeper would step aside as guards led the captive past, then follow to bolt the door once it closed. The air would be thick with the scent of fear and sweat, and for hours the hall might echo with cries until quiet returned. On rare days the dungeon held someone of rank. Then candles were lit in the upper cells, and special care was taken. Better straw, a stool, perhaps writing tools. Such guests were guarded firmly but with courtesy. Politics played their games even here. The keeper knew to say little, to move with bowed head and keep the lantern steady. By afternoon the dungeon fell silent again. Prisoners slept or brooded, their voices stilled by the weight of stone. The keeper mended what needed mending, straps for shackles, a broken lock, the rope of the bucket lowered into the well. He swept the passage, though the damp never let it stay truly clean. His was a craft of maintenance, patient and invisible. Toward evening came the second round of water and bread. The keeper carried his lantern from cell to cell, setting it down to open each hatch. Some prisoners muttered thanks, others stared blankly. A few begged for news of the world above. Was there a feast? Had judgment been passed? He answered with the barest facts, kind but distant. It was easier that way. When night fell, the dungeon grew colder. Moisture gathered on the stones, and the air turned still. Above, the castle feasted or slept. Below, only the keeper and his lantern moved. He made one last round, checking every bolt and lock, banking the tiny fires in the brazier by the stair. Then he climbed slowly upward, leaving the dark behind. The prisoners settled to uneasy sleep, their breathing and the faint rustle of straw the only sound. Sometimes, in deepest night, a horn would sound or boots would thunder on the stair. Then the dungeon woke abruptly, a new captive, a midnight judgment, an urgent message from the Lord. The keeper roused himself and obeyed, but most nights passed in quiet, the silence broken only by the distant drip of water and the sigh of sleepers. At dawn the pattern began anew. The keeper returned with lantern and keys, faithful as the turning of the seasons. He found each cell as it should be, each prisoner present and alive. Bread and water were passed, straw changed where needed, locks tested. Life here was narrow but steady, an unseen foundation of the castle's power. Above, men feasted, judged, and rode to war. Below, in the cool dark, the dungeon held fast, silent and sure. Its stones knew secrets no feast would tell. Its air was heavy with forgotten hopes and quiet endurance. And though few wished to think of it, every man in the castle, from lord to lowest page, knew that this place waited if the law or fortune ever turned against him. On long winter nights, when wind swept the moors and woods groaned under its weight, people whispered of the wild hunt. They said that somewhere beyond the safe ring of fields and hearths, a ghostly cavalcade rode, hounds baying without breath, hooves striking sparks where none should be, horns blowing faint and hollow. Few claimed to have seen it, yet everyone knew someone who had heard it. A neighbor, a grandparent, a shepherd alone on the hills. This night the rumor stirred again in a quiet hamlet tucked near the edge of the forest. Snow lay deep, stars burned sharp and close. Inside the alehouse, men gathered around the hearth, mugs steaming, while outside wind prowled and rattled the shutters. A traveling peddler had arrived before dark, shaking frost from his cloak, and now his tale held the room silent. He spoke of riding the ridge road 2 nights past, moonless sky, frozen ground, at first only the wind and creak of trees, then a horn's distant call, low and mournful. His horse pricked ears, nostrils flaring. Soon he heard hooves, many and fast, though no road lay there. Hounds bayed, not with joy, but a hollow cry that raised his hair. He spurred on and dared not look back until lights of the next village broke the dark. Around the fire the villagers listened, faces flickering gold and shadow. Old Jory, who had tended sheep on the high moor for decades, nodded slowly. "I heard it once, long ago," he said. "Sounded like a storm coming fast, though the sky was clear. My dog tucked tail and would not move until it passed." Others murmured of kin and neighbors who had told the same. Yet outside the forest lay peaceful. Snow muted every sound. The brook ran black and slow. An owl hooted softly. Fox tracks stitched the white. The wild hunt, if it rode, was far away. Still the tale lingered, curling through the alehouse like smoke. Children edged closer to their mothers. Young men exchanged uneasy grins. Later, when the peddler had gone to bed in the loft and the last mugs were drained, a few stepped outside to check the night. Stars shone so bright it seemed they might fall. The air bit sharp and cold. No horn sounded, no hoof struck, only the long sigh of wind across snowfields. Yet one could imagine riders hidden just beyond the trees, waiting. Back in their cottages, people banked fires and bolted doors a little tighter. Mothers told children to stay near hearth and light. Fathers checked that dogs were in and gates latched. It was not fear exactly, but respect same one felt for storms or deep rivers. Some left a scrap of bread on the sill or a sprig of holly by the door, small offerings against unseen riders. Near midnight, a shepherd returning late from checking his fold paused on the high path. He thought, just for a moment, that he heard something far off, a faint horn, the whisper of many hooves. Perhaps it was only the wind shifting through pines, but his dog pressed close and whined low. He hurried on, saying a prayer under his breath. Dawn came clear and cold. No tracks but fox and hare marked the snow. Yet the rumor lingered stronger than before, carried to the bakehouse, the smithy, the well. The wild hunt had been near, people said. Best to keep indoors when nights turned black and wind moaned. Best to honor the old ways. Thus the legend lived, half fear and half wonder, in the quiet hearts of those who dwelt near wild places. Whether the hunt rode or not, it kept alive a sense of the forest's mystery, that beyond the fields lay a world older and stranger than man, where ghostly riders might yet thunder under the stars. The night is barely broken when the harbor stirs to life. Mist lingers over black water, curling like pale smoke between the masts of silent ships. The tide sighs against the worn pilings, and somewhere a gull cries, a lonely sound that echoes across the sleeping town. Lanterns glow faintly along the quay, their light soft and golden against the gray of dawn. Cobblestones are slick with sea spray. The smell of salt, tar, and yesterday's catch mingles with the smoke of early fires. Slowly the quiet breaks. A fisherman stirs in his boat, drawing in the lines he set before moonrise. His boots creak on damp planks, and the small craft rocks with his weight. He hums under his breath, an old tune, perhaps one his father taught him. From a nearby shed comes the rasp of a knife being drawn across a whetstone. Another man shoulders a coil of rope and disappears down the pier. The air is cool, sharp with the promise of morning work. Farther down the quay, a great cog lies moored, its hull dark and wet from travel. Its square sail is furled for now, but soon it will be unfurled and catch the first wind. 2 deckhands sweep water from the planks, their brooms thudding softly. Another climbs to the forecastle, checking the anchor chain. A barrel of pitch smoulders near the shipwright's shed, its scent rich and heavy. Before the sun has fully risen, the harbor is alive with quiet industry. Men mending nets, merchants tallying goods, sailors shaking off sleep. Beyond the working vessels, small skiffs and fishing boats cluster like birds at rest. Nets hang to dry, heavy with the smell of the sea. Buoys bob in the current, faintly knocking against each other with the rhythm of the tide. Dogs trot between the legs of workers, tails wagging as they search for scraps. A boy runs past with a basket of bread, the smell warm and yeasty. He dodges a sailor with a coil of sailcloth on his shoulder, then leaps a pudded with easy grace. Life here begins early, shaped by water and wind. At the water edge stands the harbor master's office, a low timbered building with salt-whitened walls and a roof of weathered tiles. Inside, ledgers line the shelves, thick with years of ink and sand. The harbor master himself steps outside now, wrapped in a long cloak against the chill. He scans the tide, the ships, the men at work. In one hand he carries a small bell. When he rings it, its tone is thin but commanding. New arrivals will soon need berths, and departing vessels must clear the channel before the tide turns. Above the harbor, the town stirs more slowly. Narrow lanes run down toward the water, lined with stone houses and timbered inns. Shutters creak open to let in the first light. Somewhere a baker slides loaves into his oven, the smell drifting down to the quay. From a small chapel comes the sound of a single bell, calling the devout to early prayer. A merchant yawns on his doorstep, surveying the wagons that will soon haul goods from ship to market. The sea gives life here. Everything begins and ends with the harbor. Sunrise comes at last. The horizon brightens from iron gray to silver, then to soft gold. Light spills over the masts, catching in the rigging and waking the gulls into a storm of cries. Sails begin to rise, snapping as morning wind slips in from the sea. The great cog heaves against its ropes. Deckhands scramble, shouting to one another. Fishermen push their boats from shore, oars dipping silently. The harbour now hums with motion, every sound layered, wood creaking, water slapping, gulls calling, men laughing low. Yet even in its bust, the harbour keeps a quiet dignity. Old timbers remember countless dawns, soldiers embarking for war, pilgrims bound for far-off shrines, merchants hoping for distant wealth. Every rope and spar carries the smell of salt and stories untold. Somewhere a boy dreams of sailing beyond the horizon. Somewhere an old sailor remembers a storm survived, and still the water comes and goes, the tide faithful as the turning of the seasons. As the sun climbs higher, the harbour is fully awake. Crates of wool and grain appear on the docks, barrels roll toward waiting ships, and fishermen call their morning catch to the fishwives who haggle with knowing eyes. Dogs bark, bells ring, and the first tavern doors swing open to offer mugs of hot ale to cold hands. Another day of sea-bound labor has begun, slow, steady, and as ancient as the tide itself. High on the wooded hillside, where the path narrowed to a track no cart could follow, a small cave opened in the rock. Moss softened its edges, ivy draped across like a curtain. Smoke curled faintly from a hole in the roof, caught and pulled thin by the breeze. This was the dwelling of the hermit, a man who had turned from village and market to live alone with the silence of God and the company of the wild. His name was Brother Stephen, though few called him so now. Once he had been a monk in the great abbey below, copying psalms and tending bees. But after years of quiet longing, he had asked leave to live apart. The abbot, seeing both wisdom and weariness in his eyes, granted it. So Stephen had come to this cave with little more than a cloak, a staff, and a handful of tools, and had stayed for many seasons. Morning began early. The cave faced east, and dawn light slid in soft and gold across the rough floor. Stephen woke on his straw bed, wrapped in a woolen blanket, and stirred the embers of last night's fire until they glowed. He brewed a thin porridge and a cup of herb tea, eating slowly as he listened to birds greeting the sun. His prayers were whispered, unhurried, rising with the smoke. Afterward, he tended his small garden beds of leeks, onions, and herbs held by low stone walls. Beyond grew a few apple trees he had grafted years ago. He weeded, watered from the nearby spring, and checked traps set for rabbits or snares for fish in the stream. His life was spare but not joyless. Each task done well felt like a prayer in itself. Sometimes he carved bits of fallen oak, became simple crosses or small bowls. Smooth stones turned into beads. These he traded twice a month, when he walked down to the village. In return, he took flour, oil, and salt. The villagers met him with quiet respect. Some asked for blessings, some left food at the edge of his path rather than speak. They knew his presence brought a strange peace, though they did not always understand it. The woods around his cave were alive in subtle ways. Deer moved like shadows through dawn mist, foxes slipped silent over leaves, owls slept hidden in branches. Stephen learned their trails and voices until they felt like neighbors. Sometimes a bird would perch unafraid near his hand as he dug or prayed. He never hunted more than he needed, never took without thanks. Midday was for reading. In his cave, carefully wrapped in linen, he kept a few books, a psalter, a gospel, and an old herbal. Their pages, though worn, were loved. He read slowly, lips moving, savoring each word. Then he sat in stillness, letting thought and prayer mingle with the quiet breath of the forest. Storm days were different. Rain drummed on the rock above. Wind moaned through the trees. The cave grew dim and smoky, but Stephen felt safe within its stone embrace. He would tend the fire, mend clothes, and listen to the storm's voice. On such days he thought of the Abbey's warm halls and knew he did not regret leaving. His place was here, alone yet held by the greater silence. Sometimes travelers came seeking him, lost hunters, weary pilgrims, or those troubled in spirit climbed the hill to his door. Stephen welcomed them with tea and bread, offered a place to rest, and listened. He gave little advice, preferring questions to answers, but people left lighter, as if the quiet itself had spoken to them. On feast days he walked down to the abbey to join the monks in prayer. They greeted him as brother still, though he lived apart. He knelt with them, sang the old chants, and returned before night to his cave, the music lingering in the trees as he climbed. Winter tested him. Snow sometimes blocked the path. Wood had to be cut and stacked before frost came. Nights grew long and bitingly cold, yet the cave held warmth from the banked fire and thick furs. He sat in flickering light, carving or praying, while outside the forest slept under stars. Wolves howled far off, but the dogs of the nearby farms and Hermit's own small fire kept them away. Yet winter also brought a deep, strange beauty. Icicles hung like glass from the cave mouth. Deer came closer, pawing for food under snow. The sky on clear nights blazed with stars so sharp it seemed one could fall into them. Stephen, wrapped in furs, would stand outside and whisper prayers to the silent heavens. Spring came softly. Snowmelt trickled down to the stream. Violets bloomed in damp hollows. Stephen planted new herbs, pruned the apple trees, and gave thanks for another turning of the year. Birds built nests near his roof. Bees hummed from the hollow log where he kept a small hive. Life renewed itself without fuss. Years passed like this, quiet but rich. He aged gently, hair silvering, hands growing lean and lined. The forest became more a home than any stone hall. He spoke less to people, more to God. Yet when villagers climbed to ask blessing or herbs, he welcomed them with the same soft kindness. In his solitude, he felt not loneliness, but deep belonging. Sometimes at dusk, he lit a small lamp and set it just outside the cave. Its glow was faint but steady, a sign for wanderers that safety and warmth were near. A few shepherd boys, lost in fog, found their way by it once. A merchant delayed by storm warmed there another night. Such acts pleased Stephen quietly. No sermon could say as much as a single flame in darkness. And so the hermit's cave became part of the hill's story. Travelers spoke of it, villagers took comfort from its unseen prayers. Season by season, the man within grew older, but his life remained as simple and strong as the rocks that sheltered him. In a world full of turmoil, his small, faithful silence stood like a lantern against the dark. Deep in the forest, far beyond the last ploughed fields and the thin smoke of hamlets, stood a small log cabin. Its roof was shingled with hand-split boards darkened by rain and years. Its chimney leaned slightly, but sent up a brave curl of wood smoke. Around it lay a clearing where stumps marked old felling, and beyond that, trees closed in again, oak and beech, pine and spruce, a green wall shifting with every breath of wind. The hunter who lived there was called Gerard by the few who knew him. Tall and spare, with a beard gone silver, he moved through woods as quietly as deer. Each autumn he filled the village larders with venison and wild boar. In winter he trapped fur for trade, but most days passed in calm solitude, his life bound to the forest's slow heartbeat. Morning began with fire. Gerard rose at first light, stirred the coals buried under ash, and set a pot to boil herbal tea and porridge. The cabin's single room was simple: bed of furs, shelves of dried herbs and smoked meat, bow and quiver hung neatly by the door. He ate slowly, listening to the waking forest, the cough of a stag, the scold of squirrels, the first low drumming of woodpeckers. After breakfast, he checked his gear, bowstring tested and waxed, arrows counted and fletched, knife whetted until it sang on stone. His dog, a quiet hound with wise eyes, watched every move. Then they slipped outside, boots crunching frost, and locked the door with a simple latch against curious animals rather than men. The day's hunt might be long or brief. Sometimes Gerard followed deer tracks deep into shadow, reading each bent grass and print in the mud. Other time he checked snays set along rabbit runs, freeing what he needed and resetting with care. He never took more than the forest could spare. Years had taught him the balance. The forest spoke in signs. Birds bursting upward warned of larger prey or predator. A faint musky scent told of boar nearby. The hush of small creatures meant wolves or bear might be close. Gerard read these without thought, moving with a slow, careful grace that kept him part of the woods rather than intruder. At midday he often paused to eat bread, dried meat, a flask of watered ale. He chose a fallen log or sunny rock, always watchful but at ease. His hound rested close, ears twitching even in sleep. Sometimes the hunter dozed briefly, waking at the least crack of twig. The forest's hum lulled but never deceived him. In autumn the work was hardest but richest. Deer fattened on fallen acorns, boar roamed bold. Gerard smoked meat in a small hut beside the cabin, its roof vented to let blue ribbons of fragrant smoke curl upward. The smell of oak and hickory hung sweet and sharp for weeks. Villagers came to trade grain, cloth, and salt for the winter's venison. Winter brought quiet hardship. Snow-blanketed paths, game grew scarce and wary. Gerard mended traps, kept the hearth bright, and lived on stored food. Some days he tracked fox or marten for their fur, selling pelts to passing merchants come spring. Nights were long but peaceful, fire crackling, hounds snoring softly, wind whispering through pines. Occasionally travelers knocked lost pilgrims, woodcutters delayed by storm, messengers seeking a short road. Gerard welcomed them with stew and fire, asked few questions, and saw them safely on their way. His cabin was known for miles as a quiet refuge, though no sign marked it. He kept a small shrine in one corner, a wooden cross carved by his own hands, a sprig of evergreen laid before it each Christmas. Though seldom among men, he prayed simply and often, finding God in the steady turn of seasons, the patience of trees, and the clear night sky. Spring softened the world again. Snowmelt trickled down from the hills. Deer shed winter coats. New shoots broke through leaf mold. Gerard walked the forest, checking which trails remained sound, repairing small bridges of logs where floods had torn them away. He planted herbs near the cabin, mint, sage, yarrow, for medicine and cooking alike. Summer was his quietest tie. Game ranged deep and scarce. He lived mostly on fish from the stream and the garden's bounty. The woods grew heavy with green, insects buzzing, air rich with pine and warm earth. On such days he carved spoons, bowls, handles for knives. Sometimes he hummed old songs remembered from youth, though no one was near to hear. Loneliness came, but gently. Gerard had chosen it and knew how to greet it, with work, with prayer, with the faithful presence of his hound. Now and then he visited the village for salt and trade, sharing ale with old friends, catching news of lords and wars. Yet he was always glad to turn homeward, back to the still trees and the soft clearing. Evenings in the cabin were simple. Meat hung smoking outside, herbs dried from the rafters. He read when he had a candle, or simply watched the fire until sleep pulled him down. Sometimes wolves howled far off, and the dog lifted its head but didn't bark. The cabin felt snug and safe. Rain drummed on the roof. Wind rattled the shutters. Inside, warmth and peace held steady. Years shaped a life as the forest shapes a tree, slowly with patience. Gerard aged but stayed strong. His cabin weathered storms and snow, but its hearth never went cold. Hunters passed, travelers rested, and still he walked each dawn with bow and dog, part of the same quiet rhythm. In a world of lords and wars, his story was small, yet in the hush of the deep woods it felt enough. A man, a dog, a steady fire, and the unending song of leaves and water. The hunter's cabin stood unseen by most, but it was a world entire for the one who called it home. High above the lowlands, where fields give way to stone and the air turns sharp with pine and ice, a narrow pass winds between jagged peaks. Merchants and pilgrims use it in summer when the snows have retreated. Shepherds lead flocks across to greener valleys. Sometimes soldiers march its rocky floor. But most days it lies quiet and lonely, swept by wind, guarded by cliffs that catch the sky. At dawn the pass glowed pale and cold. Frost silvered the sparse grass. Every rock gleamed wet where meltwater had frozen in the night. A single mule train moved slowly upward, 3 animals laden with wool and salt, led by a trader named Renaud. His cloak was heavy, hood drawn tight, breath puffed white as he trudged. Behind him followed his nephew, a boy of 15, eager-eyed despite the chill. The way was no more than a track scratched into stone, wide enough for 1 cart at most. To the left, cliffs rose sheer. To the right, the land fell away into mist. Pine and larch clung where they could, their dark needles sighing in the wind. Somewhere far below, water roared unseen. Bells on the mules jingled softly, the only sound besides boots crunching frost. They passed an old wayside shrine, a weathered cross set into rock, candles long burned to stubs. Travelers for centuries had left tokens there, pebbles, coins, bits of ribbon, to seek safe passage. Renaud paused, touched the wood with gloved fingers, and murmured a prayer before moving on. The boy copied him solemnly, learning the silent ritual of the road. As the sun climbed, the mountains came alive with color. Snowfields glared white far above. Lower slopes blazed with autumn gold where larches turned, ravens wheeled and croaked, riding invisible currents. A marmot whistled sharp from a rocky perch. The boy grinned, but Renai only nodded. Beauty here was matched by danger. They reached the first true height by mid-morning. The path narrowed, twisting between sheer walls. Here old stones marked the border of two lordships, though no guard kept watch now. Once, long ago, tolls had been taken. Now the stones simply stood mossy and silent, carved with faint heraldic beasts. Wind hissed through the gap like breath through teeth. On the far side, the world opened in a breathtaking sweep, valleys rolling away to blue distance, snow on distant ridges gleaming like steel. The mules stopped of their own accord, ears flicking. Renaud and the boy stood a while gazing. Such sights humbled even seasoned travelers. The boy whispered a prayer without thinking. They pressed on carefully, for the descent was trickier than the climb. Loose shale shifted under boots, stones clattered down slopes. Renaud led the first mule with steady hand, speaking calm words. The boy kept the second's rope taut, learning the skill of guiding weight on treacherous ground. Far below, a faint thread of smoke marked a shepherd's hut, first sign of life they had seen since dawn. At midday they stopped at a small shelf where water trickled from rock into a trough carved long ago. Here they let the mules drink and fed them grain. They themselves ate bread and hard cheese, washing it down with cold water. Silence hung heavy but peaceful, broken only by the wind and the occasional clink of a mule's harness. Not all journeys here were so calm. Renaud told the boy old tales of avalanches burying caravans, of wolves bold in deep snow, of bandit once lurking before the lords cleared them out. The boy listened wide-eyed, glancing at every shadowed outcrop, but no danger showed itself today. Only the mountains, patient and vast, watched their passing. They moved again as clouds gathered. Weather changes swiftly in the heights. What begins as gentle mist can become driving snow. Renaud kept an eye on the peaks, knowing when to hurry. Soon the path dipped into a sheltered cleft, lined with dwarf pines, a place travelers often camped when storms threatened. There stood an old stone hut, roof patched but sound, built for just such refuge. Inside, it smelled of smoke and old wool. A hearth blackened with years of fire waited, and a small pile of wood remained from some generous soul. Renaud set about kindling a blaze, while the boy unpacked blankets. The mules, tethered safely outside, chewed hay and stamped quietly. Warmth spread slowly as flames took hold, painting the stone walls with soft gold. Outside, the wind rose, bringing thin sleet that rattled on the roof. They were glad for the hut's shelter. Renaud spoke softly of roadcraft, how to read snow lines, where to find springs, how to follow cairns when fog hides the path. The boy listened, soaking in wisdom older than maps. By dusk, the weather eased. They stepped outside to find clouds broken and the world awash in pink and silver. Peaks flamed briefly, then dimmed to blue shadow. A single star appeared, bright above the pass. The boy gasped, and even Renaud smiled, weary but moved. Such beauty was the quiet gift of hard roads. They slept in the hut, warm by the fire, mules shifting softly nearby. Outside the night was vast and cold, wolves howled far off, but the sturdy walls and steady blaze kept fear at bay. Renaud prayed a short prayer of thanks for safe passage thus far and closed his eyes, trusting the mountain's patience. At dawn they rose again, breaking their fast quickly, and began the last leg down into the far valley. Mist burned away to reveal green slopes dotted with sheep and smoke from distant cottages. Bells from a chapel floated faintly up. The boy grinned in relief. Renaud's heart lightened too. Another crossing nearly done. Such is the mountain pass, harsh yet fair, demanding care but offering wonder. Travelers come and go, some fearful, some awed, all humbled by its vast quiet. Stone and wind remember every step, but give safe passage to those who move with patience and respect. Dawn comes pale and gray over the fields, and the road already stirs. A cart creaks as it leaves a farmyard. A man with staff and bundle strides out, cloak swinging. A pilgrim lifts eyes to distant spire. In the Middle Ages, the open road was both lifeline and risk. It linked quiet hamlets to bustling towns, fairs, and shrines, carrying goods, news, and dreams. To walk it was to step into a slow river of human movement, each traveler with story tucked beneath cloak. Most roads were simple earth tracks, hardened by hooves and wheels. Some were paved remnants of Roman stone, still proud centuries later, others little more than ruts winding through fields and wood. In wet weather, mud sucked boots and wheels. In dry months, dust rose in choking clouds. Yet these paths were arteries of trade and pilgrimage. Milestones or crosses sometimes marked distance. In France and England, wayside chapels or shrines gave rest to weary. Travel began early. Peasants set off with dawn to reach market before noon. Merchants moved in cautious groups, wagons piled with wool, salt, iron, or wine. Messengers for lords spurred horses hard, cloaks streaming. Pilgrims started slow but steady, staffs tapping rhythm as they sang quiet hymns. Some roads echoed with church bells, some with only wind. Every traveler planned for safety. Roads could be lonely, robbers and outlaws haunted woods, and wild animals, wolves in some regions, boars or bears in others, lurked at edge. Many went armed, staff tipped with iron, knife at belt, sometimes bow. Caravans hired guards or rode under lord's banner. Lone travelers kept to daylight, seeking inn or monastery by dusk. Inns and taverns dotted major ways, simple but welcome. A timber hall with straw on floor, stew bubbling on hearth, ale or wine to slake thirst. Stable boys took horses, travelers shared benches and stories. Payment could be coin or goods, Sometimes poor slept by fire for small fee. Hospices run by monks or hospitallers sheltered pilgrims freely, offering bread, broth, and blessing. The people of the road were many, peddlers with packs of pins, cloth, and trinkets, tinkers mending pots, jugglers and minstrels seeking coin, scholars on way to universities, knights and their retinues riding to war or tournament, peasants hired for harvest afar. Some roads thronged before great fairs, wagons in long line, bells and laughter ringing. Merchants watched sky and season. Winter travel was dangerous. Deep mud, snowdrifts, short light, frozen rivers breaking. Spring promised safer roads, but floods. Summer longest days, but dust and heat. Autumn busiest with harvest goods, fairs, and pilgrims. Along routes, bridges were precious, tolls often charged, but safer than fording swollen stream. Ferrymen worked tirelessly, poles pushing heavy barges across. Religion marked the way. Crosses, shrines, or statues of saints guarded bends and bridges. Travelers paused for prayer and small coin. Pilgrim badges glinted on cloaks. Scallop for Compostela, keys for Rome, shell or ampulla for Canterbury. Bells of distant church promised shelter. In some lands, towns lit beacons or candles to guide late walkers. Law touched roads lightly. Sheriffs or bailiffs patrolled main routes. Toll collectors guarded gates. Lords claimed right to levy passing merchants. At times, traveling under safe conduct, a written protection from king or abbot was wise. Without it, strangers risked suspicion or seizure. Yet fellowship grew among travelers. At inns, strangers shared bread and fire, swapping news, harvest good in south, plague in port city, new relic at shrine. Stories of haunted crossroads or hidden treasure passed from mouth to ear. Warnings too, where bandit lurked, where ferries dangerous, which bridges broke. The road had its own community, loose but real. Sounds and scents defined journey. Horses snorted, cartwheels groaned, bells on mule teams jingled. Smell of damp earth, leather, hay, sweat, smoke from distant fires. Morning birdsong gave way to hum of insects. At night frogs and wolves took chorus. Lantern lights swayed from late wagons. Constellations guided those without. Meals were simple but comforting. Bread from last bake, cheese wrapped in cloth, dried meat or fish. Pilgrims shared pottage at hospices. Merchants might cook by roadside, pot hung over small fire. Water was risky, ale safer though heavy to carry. Streams welcomed for refill when clear. Each night brought decision. Press on to next inn, camp beneath hedge, or beg monastery gate. Campers built small fires, set watch, told tales under stars. Fear and wonder mingled. Dark woods whispered of spirits and thieves, but also of deer passing gentle and unseen. Many prayed before sleep, trusting saints and sword alike. Trade made these roads vital, wool from English sheep, salt from inland pans, wine from French vineyards, furs from the north, spices through long chains from east, all rolled by cart and hoof. Markets swelled because roads carried life. Pilgrims brought alms, jongleurs brought news, messengers bound realms. Yet roads were more than commerce. They were paths of love and hope, brides riding to new homes, sons returning from war, letters of peace carried after feud. Monks walked them to found abbeys, scholars to seek knowledge, dreamers simply to see beyond horizon. The road was freedom for some, burden for others, but always thread, binding scattered world. By evening, after long march, weary travelers saw lights of next village. Dogs barked, smith's hammer rang faint, tavern laughter drifted. Relief washed in, feet blistered, pack heavy, but shelter near. Tomorrow would bring new miles, but tonight fire, bread, ale, and perhaps new friends. So when you picture medieval travel, think not only of knights, but of the open road itself, muddy and sunlit, lonely and lively, echoing with prayers, songs, and wagon wheels. It carried trade, news, and dreams across a world both harsh and full of quiet wonder. Where the trade road slips into low hills and scattered woods, travelers often make camp. There is no inn for miles, only a clearing known by those who wander, a flat circle of earth ringed by oaks, with a stone fire pit at its heart. The stones are blackened by countless nights of smoke and flame. Here, strangers become neighbors for a few quiet hours, sharing warmth, food, and stories before the road calls them on. At sunset, a single traveler arrives first. She is a wool merchant named Isolde, leading a patient gray mule. She has walked since dawn and is glad to stop. Her boots are dusted pale, her cloak damp with sweat, but her face holds calm determination. She unslings her pack, gathers fallen wood, and coaxes a small fire to life with practiced hands. Sparks rise, the clearing glows softly as the sky deepens to violet. Soon a second wanderer comes, a young man named Perrin, traveling home from the fair. He leads a thin dog and carries a lute on his back. He greets Isolde with a cautious smile and asks if he might share the fire. She nods. Strangers here know the silent rules. Bring wood, offer food if you can, harm no one. Perrin lays down his bundle, helps fetch more sticks, and sets a kettle of water to heat. While they work, another pair appears from the dusk, a carter and his wife driving a small wagon piled with sacks. They have no need of lodging, they carry their own shelter, but a warm fire draws them in. The wife unpacks bread and a wheel of cheese. The man tends his horse. Greetings are brief but kind. The clearing fills with the simple sounds of camp. Snapping twigs, quiet voices, the hiss of water about to boil. As the fire brightens, so does fellowship. Will stirs a pot of barley and beans, sharing a little salt pork from her stores. Perrin adds dried herbs from a pouch. The carter's wife contributes onions and a splash of ale. Soon a pot of stew bubbles fragrant and filling. Each traveler keeps their own cup or bowl, but ladles freely for others. Steam carries the scent of comfort into the cool night air. More footsteps come from the road. A pair of pilgrims with staves and scallop shells at their caps approach shyly. One has a limp, the other supports him. The travelers wave them in without question. Soon the pilgrims are seated, warming hands and murmuring thanks. One produces a small flask of wine. Perrin strums his lute softly while they eat. The darkness deepens. The clearing fills with gentle light and easy voices. Stories begin as they always do. Perrin sings a ballad learned at the fair, a tale of lost love and found home. Isel tells of sheep markets and winter roads. The carter shares news of grain prices and a bridge washed out far to the west. The pilgrims speak of the long miles behind and ahead, of shrines visited, of quiet prayers. Each tale is simple, but shared with warmth. The night air smells of wood smoke and stew, of damp earth and cooling iron from the wagon's wheels. Above, stars sharpen in a sky scrubbed clear by day's breeze. Owls call from the woods. Firelight dances on the circle of faces, some weathered, some young, all weary but peaceful. The rules of the road hold, no boasting, no harm, no theft. Here everyone is simply a soul between places. After supper, Perrin plays again, a lighter tune now, sprightly and hopeful. The carter taps his knee to the rhythm, the pilgrims smile and hum along. Isolde mend a small tear in her pack by firelight, content. Conversation drifts to memories of other roads, dangerous passes, generous strangers, a night caught in storm. The common thread is always survival and kindness found unexpectedly. One by one they prepare for sleep. Isolde rolls her cloak near the fire. Perrin rigs a small lean-to with his loot case tucked safe. The carter and his wife sleep in their wagon, horse tethered nearby. The pilgrims spread cloaks and whisper prayers. Someone adds last wood to the fire so embers will last till dawn. Its glow warms the circle as night settles fully. Silence comes but for the fire's soft cracker and night sounds beyond, crickets, a fox's bark, distant river sigh. Stars wheel above the clearing, bright and cold. A breeze stirs the oaks, scattering a few leaves to dance in the light. The travelers sleep lightly but with trust. This place is known as safe ground, protected by its long tradition. Near midnight, Isolde wakes briefly. She checks the mule, adds a stick to the fire, and looks around at the sleeping shapes. In the glow she feels a quiet gratitude, alone on the road, one to be vulnerable. But here, tonight, strangers have become something gentler. She lies down again and sleeps. Before dawn, the fire is mostly embers, but one pilgrim rises to pray. He faces east, whispering words lost to the cool breeze, then adds a twig to the coals, so smoke will greet the coming sun. Soon Yisold stirs, then Perrin, then the carter and his wife. Quiet morning movements replace the hush, rolling cloaks, fastening packs, rubbing eyes. No one lingers long. The road is patient but waiting. Breakfast is simple, and shared crusts of bread dipped in last night's broth, dried fruit passed hand to hand, a swallow of wine for warmth. Perrin plays a brief waking tune on the lute, light and hopeful. Smiles pass among them, not grand, but real. They depart in small waves. The pilgrims take the east road, staffs tapping softly. The carter clucks to his horse and rolls south, his wife waving from the wagon seat. Perrin heads west with his dog trotting ahead, humming as he goes. Yisold stays a moment longer, scattering ashes, covering the fire pit stones, and checking the clearing for stray scraps, another wayfarer's kindness for those who will come next. When she finally leads her mule onward, the clearing is empty but not lonely. The scent of smoke lingers, and the earth is warm where the fire burned. Birds begin to sing as the first gold light spills through the oaks. By noon, new travelers may arrive, tired and hungry, and find the place ready. Stones set, space clear, a silent invitation to safety. The road rolls on, long and uncertain, but here it offers this small mercy, a circle of stones, a fire's memory, and the knowledge that strangers can be gentle for one night beneath the same stars. When the last light fades and doors are barred, a medieval night begins. Vast, quiet, and alive with small, unsettling noises. The day's rhythm ends with clatter of tools and low talk around hearth. Then a hush falls so deep you'd hear your own breath. Yet darkness is never truly silent. It holds a chorus of night sounds, some comforting, some strange, some filled with dread for those who listen from straw-filled beds. The most familiar voice of night is the dog. Almost every homestead keeps one. By day it guards herd and yard. By night it lifts head at each distant step. A sudden bark, then another, passes from farm to farm like message in code. Stranger on road, fox in chicken run, thief perhaps. Villagers wake, listen, then settle again if barking dies. Sometimes it grows frenzied, a sure sign of danger that sets hearts racing in dark. Owls haunt rafters and barns. Their soft wing beats are barely heard, but their call, long, tremulous hoot or eerie screech, cuts deep silence. Folk K an owl near house foretells sickness or death. Some cross themselves when they hear it. Yet owls also keep rats from granaries, so fear mixes with gratitude. Nightjars, bats, and other winged hunters flit unseen, their brief cries hinting at wildlife just beyond shutter. Wind is another presence. On still nights it whispers gently, stirring thatch and hedges, but when storms blow it howls down chimneys, rattles shutters, and seems full of voices. Children pull blankets close, imagining ghosts riding gusts. Adults know wind could strip roofs or fell trees. They listen for signs of danger. Some pray to Saint Medard or hang protective charms in rafters. Water speaks too. In river villages, one hears steady murmur or sudden splash, a fish jumping perhaps, or something stranger. Mills creak faintly where wheels turn through night. In coastal towns the tide sighs and booms, masts clink against each other. Travelers camping by stream hear frogs, crickets, and, far off, wolves drinking. Animals of field and forest move under moon. Foxes bark sharply, badgers snuffle, deer step delicately through meadow. Wolves are rare in settled places, but still feared. Their howl sends shiver straight to bone. Bears linger in deep woods. Boar crash through thickets. Farmers know to keep pens stout and fires bright. Human sounds are rarer but more alarming. A lone footstep on road when all should sleep. Creak of cart, muffled voices plotting theft. Bandits sometimes roam. Peasants post watch or rely on dogs. Bells may toll if fire breaks out or enemy raids. Night watchmen in towns call hours and weather. 3 o'clock and a fair night. Their cry reassures yet reminds that danger lurks. Beyond natural dangers live fears of the unseen. Medieval people believe night thin between worlds. Ghosts of unburied or wronged may wander. Witches fly to Sabbath. Demons prowl for souls. Shutters close tight. Crosses hung over doors. Holy water sprinkled. Charmed sprigs of rue. Carved saints guard bed. Parents teach children not to whistle in dark, lest spirits answer. Tales abound. A traveler who ignored curfew met black dog with burning eyes. A woman gathering herbs at midnight vanished. Lights flickering in marsh may be will-o'-wisps luring to doom. Some say dead relatives visit sleepers kindly or warning. Fear keeps most inside after dark, save for urgent tasks or festival revelry. Yet night is it only dread? Many find it peaceful once safe indoors. The crackle of banked hearth, murmur of sleeping kin, slow breathing of animals nearby soothe. Stars through tiny window comfort travelers. Moonlight silvering field feels holy. Some rise between first and second sleep to pray, read, or speak softly. Monks chant vigils in distant abbey. Bells drift on wind, calming hearts. Festivals turn night from fear to joy. On Midsummer's Eve or Christmas Vigil, bonfires blaze, songs and dances drive darkness away. Lanterns swing in processions, church bells clash against spirits. Even wary elders smile as children play under sparks. Such nights remind all that community outshines fear. Practical defenses abound, doors barred with heavy timber, windows shuttered, dogs kept near threshold, weapons, staff, billhook, or sword at hand. In towns, watch patrols with lanterns and horns. Villages sometimes light beacons or gather men if trouble known. Safety is shared work. Fear is eased by preparation. Dreams carry their own weight. People believe night visions can warn or heal. Some pray to remember, others to forget. Bad dreams blamed on demons, overeating or spirits. Good ones from saints or angels. Charms under pillow, prayers before sleep, or placing knife beneath mattress protect dreamer. Night also invites intimacy. Couples whisper secrets, parents tell tales, siblings laugh under covers. Firelight softens hard days' edges, dark hides poverty and toil. Here bonds strengthen unseen, in noble houses. Retainers talk quietly in guardrooms. Lords and ladies speak of plans or worries beyond hall's ears. Darkness makes listeners equal. Season colors these hours. Winter nights are longest and coldest, full of wind and wolves, but also snug fires and shared blankets. Spring carries damp scents and frog song. Travelers risk boggy paths. Summer nights are short, warm, lively with insects and festivals. Autumn grows eerie with mists, harvest fires, and migrating birds crying overhead. Each has its own mood. So picture medieval darkness, not as empty void, but as living tapestry. Dogs barking chain-wise, owls swooping, wind singing in eaves, whispers of prayer, crackle of hearth, fear and safety, dread and comfort mingled. The night sounds and fears were constant companions, shaping how people prayed, built, and dreamed until first pale light returned. In the heart of winter, when snow drapes the rooftops and the lanes lie silent beneath a cold moon, the hearth becomes the kingdom of the night. In one modest stone house on a narrow lane, a single fire burns low and steady. Its light flickers across beams blackened by years of smoke and warms the faces of those gathered close. Here, sleep is coaxed as gently as bread rising by embers. The household is simple, a mother, a father, 2 children, and the old grandmother whose hands are knotted with time. They have finished the long day of chores, feeding the animals, chopping wood, stirring the stew that warmed their supper. Now, with bowls washed and shutters barred, they sit before the hearth to savor the quiet. The father sits nearest the blaze, carving a new handle for the kitchen ladle. Each slow stroke of his knife releases a curl of pale wood. His boots steam faintly, drying after his last trip to the woodshed. The mother spins wool on a low stool, the spindle humming softly in her fingers. Beside her, the daughter curls up with a patched doll, while the small boy, drowsy from play, leans against the grandmother's knee. The fire itself is built of seasoned oak logs that burn with a steady glow. Above the flames, an iron pot hangs empty now, only a ghost of stew scent lingering. Sprigs of rosemary and thyme crackle when tossed in, perfuming the room with sharp green warmth. The dog sleeps stretched out near the hearthstone, twitching occasionally in dreams. Grandmother is the keeper of night tales. She has told them for decades, first to her own children, now to theirs. Her voice is soft but carries well in the hush. Tonight, she begins with an old favorite, the story of the winter wren who braved the longest night to bring back the sun. The children know it well, but never tire of the way she shapes each word, slow and sure. She tells of the little bird's journey over snowbound fields and through dark forests, of how it carried a spark of light in its tiny beak to wake the dawn. The daughter clutches her doll, the boy's eyelids sag. Even the parents, though they have heard this tale countless times, smile quietly as the words roll out, warm as the fire. Outside, wind scuffs against the shutters and sighs down the chimney. The room answers with the crackle of oak and the grandmother's even tone. Shadows dance on the walls, sometimes tall, sometimes small, as if the story itself were moving through the room. The father finishes the laded handle and sets it aside, taking up a small knife to trim the fire's edge. He adds one last log, careful not to wake too fierce a flame. Night's warmth should be steady, not blazing. The mother sets down her spindle and draws the daughter into her lap, smoothing her hair. The boy slides from grandmother's knee to curl against the dog, whose warm flank makes the perfect pillow. Grandmother's story drifts into a quiet ending. The wren safe in its nest as dawn breaks and light spills back across the land. She falls silent, looking at the children with soft pride. So we wake to each new day, she whispers, because even the smallest heart can keep the dark at bay. The girl murmurs, half asleep. The boy stirs and then settles deeper. For a time no one speaks. The fire hums and pops, the only voice needed. The parents watch the children slip toward dreams and exchange a glance that is part love, part relief. Another day done, another night safely begun. The grandmother folds her hands and leans back, eyes half closed but still keeping a quiet watch. When the children are fully drowsing, the father rises and gently lifts the boy, carrying him to the low bed tucked against the far wall. The mother takes the daughter's hand and leads her to join him, pulling up thick wool blankets, tucking them tight. The dog follows to curl at their feet, sighing once before surrendering to sleep. Back at the hearth, the adults linger a while longer. The father carves a little more at the ladle handle, smoothing its curves. The mother sips from a small cup of warm milk flavored with nutmeg. Grandmother dozes in her chair, but wakes when the wind rattles the shutters, murmuring a prayer before slipping back into slumber. These are the hours when the house feels most alive, though nearly silent. The walls hold the day's work and the night's calm. The hearth keeps its steady glow. The parents talk softly of plans, a trip to market if the snow holds, mending to finish, seed to save for spring. Their words are slow and practical, but underneath is a deep contentment. When at last yawns claim them, the father banks the fire. He rakes coals into a neat mound, covers them with ash, and places a small log atop so embers will last until morning. The light dims to a red glow that breathes in the dark. He sets the carving knife aside, cleans the shavings from the hearth, and checks the latch on the door. The mother stirs the dog just enough to coax it back to its rug, then helps the grandmother rise. Together they guide her to the bedchamber, where quilts and a hot brick wrapped in cloth wait. She smiles at them both, weary but grateful. They kiss her cheek and whisper good night. The house is nearly dark now, lit only by the fire's heart and one beeswax candle on the table. The parents move quietly, snuffing lamps, folding wool wraps. They share a last glance around the room, tools put by, boots drying by the hearth, the day's peace intact. Then they take each other's hands and climb the small stair to the loft. Before sleeping, they pause at the window to look out. Snow falls lightly now, flakes catching the faint glow from the fire below. The town is still, roofs are white, chimneys smoking gently. Somewhere a bell tolls the late hour, and the sound seems softer wrapped in snow. They breathe the cold air that slips through a crack, then close the shutter and return to warmth. They slip into their bed, heavy quilts layered against the night. The candle is snuffed with a quick whisper of smoke. Darkness embraces them, but not emptily. The whole house hums with quiet safety, children sleeping, dog dreaming, grandmother breathing slow, embers glowing on the hearth. The day's labor is behind, tomorrow's waits, but cannot touch them now. Dreams come gentle here. They rise from the steady warmth of the banked fire, from the scent of herbs and wood smoke, from the remembered story of the brave little wren. The parents drift into sleep holding hands. Downstairs the coals pulse softly, a heartbeat for the home. Outside, the snow deepens, muffling every sound. The lane is empty, save for a wandering cat that leaves light prints before vanishing. Above, the sky clears enough for stars to glimmer cold and bright. Inside, the house is an island of warmth, wrapped in night's deep stillness. When dawn finally comes, it will find this family rested and safe, their dreams gently tended by firelight and the old rituals of bedtime. But for now, the night reigns calm and unbroken. A single coal glows in the hearth like a small guardian star, and sleep enfolds all who dwell within.